Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CIO Retail Leadership Forum. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would love to introduce our speaker, Ray Sturby, VP Information Security and Privacy at Signet Jewelers. We are excited to have Ray with us for a keynote presentation titled Data Privacy Regulations, a Retail Primer. Welcome, Ray. Over to you.
Yes, thanks, Nick. And hello, everyone. There's been a lot of great topics today on this session. And this particular topic is on consumer data and the impact of privacy regulations and expectations on it. There's a lot to cover, but just for context, I won't cover, sort of Chat GPT privacy implications or TikTok and, whether it has sort of legitimate interest for, monitoring your phone's clipboard or, keystroke patterns. But what this will be is a cursory overview of the sort of growing privacy laws and consumer expectations on privacy from a privacy function within a retail environment. By way of introduction, I'm about 23-year veteran in cybersecurity and privacy. Worked in retail for more than half of that. And I have built and operating sort of privacy programs, across a handful of companies. And this is sort of the 5-minute overview or the 10,000 foot level overview of the regulations and a handful of specific points that intersect with the industry. So I wanted to come back on the problem statement here, right? And that is we have 5 states with relatively wide-spanning privacy laws. There's conversations of a lot more. A lot of states are online. I'll come back to it in a second. There's all states. There's laws for data breach notification in all states, and that includes financial details like license number in case you're scanning them, or includes passwords, credentials. So there's a really large spectrum of data and scope for what has to be reported to individuals and those relative state AGs in case of breach. But the most important one, I think, and I'm going to spend a little more time on in this conversation, is really around the higher sensitivity for privacy. I mentioned the TikTok component, the TikTok topic, but there's a significant amount of questions and a big increase in people reaching out for privacy requests, privacy questions. This feeds into a number of lawsuits that I've experienced, I've been part of, and I've heard my peers mentioned, anywhere from people trying to complain because there's the notice isn't there, or perhaps when we do a virtual try-on, there's infringement and some sort of consent violation for biometrics law, or perhaps there's people that go around, and I've heard of these folks that go around and check to see if they've opted out of tracking and if there's still Facebook and social media trackers on those sites still working, that sort of thing. There's a lot of a lot of interest in privacy and in the regulatory space. I am putting this map. I put this map together on the deck here to give you context of what states are active, which states are sort of coming up, and the big part of the point here is we have different scoping conversations, right? Some states have different laws in terms of what's in scope and what's not in scope, right? California is a big one. It's been around for 2 years. It's from a retailer perspective, I think they have 100,000 customer records. If you're processing more than that, that's your scope, or $25 million in revenue. Virginia is one that also has 100,000 or 25,000 customer records. If you're deriving half the revenue from that group, there's nuances to each of these, and a legal function, I think, or attorney, right, would sort of help decipher the details. But I wanted to provide some context that there are nuances. Most of the laws are relatively similar in nature as far as obligations on businesses, but in US, the expectation is that a lot more states and federal legislation were relatively aligned with what California put out there 2 years ago. That is sort of relatively based on sort of the floor, right? The expectations for this. Once we go outside US, it's even a more interesting sort of tapestry of regulations. Canada is one that steps up the expectations from US. Europe is a very, you probably heard of GDPR, right? It's a very, I would say, stringent implementation of the framework. Asia is a mixed bag, and Latin America is up and coming. So again, I think if we go international, it gets complicated very, very quickly. But the concepts and the ideas are similar enough from a retailer perspective and obligations. So let's go through them a little bit. I think the first is really around just disclosure of what type of data you're collecting, and what you're doing with it. I think the transparency aspect is a big one. It's illustrated in privacy notices and disclaimers and terms and conditions, right? There's a lot of pieces there, but the idea there is that we should be transparent as much as possible, right, with what we're collecting and what's not. The other aspect of transparency is around consent, and this is where things are simple on paper, much more difficult to implement. US in general has a opt-out policy, so opt-out approach to consent. So we get emails and then you can unsubscribe, right? That's the concept across the board. There's some exceptions like SMS you have to opt in. Biometrics, you need to provide some, you need to provide some explicit consent, but for majority cases is opt-out. Europe is not. Europe is you opt in first, and then you can begin to track or to reach out and contact customers. Those are in Canada's a little bit of the middle, right? Canada is you opt out, but you have to make it very easy and straightforward for people to opt out, right? It's not, you can't bury in like a footer or like on a privacy page. That is the quick sort of quick survey of consent. The other aspect, that a privacy function entails is consumer requests and questions. We have a lot of those. We have a lot of those in the context of please don't subscribe me, please don't contact me, or delete my information. Those are the big ones. There's people do want to understand what kind of information we have on them, the right to access. This is relatively complicated. It's much easier for smaller ecosystems or like purely e-com sort of retailers, but a lot of the bigger retailers have complicated and large ecosystems of third parties and systems, and that requires relatively high degree of involvement. There's some tools out there that we can deploy to automate some of these, but I would say overall, the industry is still not there yet. These privacy laws have been around for only a few years. So we haven't had large kind of portfolio providers to really understand it, digest it, and provide relatively easy functionality for customers to easily respond and handle these requests. I wanted to mention one more kink in this, and that is the California law. Actually, there was a new version that came out this year that also includes employee data. So this is a brand new thing. They've been talking about it 2 years ago when we launched it. So we have the same conversation on the employer side, right? Who can provide the requests to be deleted? Is it ex-employees? Is it active employees? Candidates? The answer is probably all the above, but and what type of deletion, what can happen, right? When somebody requests to be deleted. Again, these conversations are relatively new. We got a question here. Let me just pause for a second to address it. The top things retailers can do to stay up to changes. That's a great question, and the easy answers are you outsource to some sort of service, or there's a bunch of privacy vendors in the space that can provide you dashboards or can provide you updates like regulatory updates. There's also tons of law firms that focus on privacy. They can also keep up to speed. They're a little bit high, more expensive, but there's quite a few of them that specialize in this function. And lastly, I would say a lot of the legal corporate teams have been more engaged. I would say they've been more engaged because of these lawsuits and because of regulations. And again, I'm speaking to my peers. I see many of them either have their own sort of volunteer attorney that works on privacy issues, or they hire somebody and that focus on privacy to basically keep up to date with all these regulations. I would say the regulation though question is not a very high fast sort of moving, right? Regulation is slow. It's slow. It's streaming though. It's constant. It's not on and off, but it's not something that you blink and you miss it, right? There's a long period of time on that. The other question is, Europe and Canada are up on the collection. I think the states. That's another great question, right? Is it because the autonomy of the states versus kind of federal level? That is a great question, and that is absolutely correct. The federal level regulation, at least in the US, has been something on the books for a long time. There's been many bills passed, mostly bipartisan, but every party has senators that sort of put out bills out there. Last time I checked, and to prep for this conversation, I think it was 18 different bills in Congress. But these are hard. These are hard things because they require businesses to comply. These obligations are not easy. And that is not the case in Europe and in Canada. They have federal agencies that are basically governing these regulations. So that is definitely part of it. As I mentioned, in US, California talked about this for a long time. The law went into effect in 2020. California's model has been adopted by at least in sort of a industry circles, but a lot of states, and there's a sort of a good balance between business obligations versus consumer rights, right? There's always that sort of give and take. So I feel like California is still like our most aggressive state for privacy regulations, but there's plenty of states that sort of come to up to speed. The continuous obligations component, there's a handful of things. One is so consumer rights, obviously security is a big foundation of privacy, and their expectations to really implement security across the board, a risk-based kind of security system. So we're talking about assessing your vendors, doing risk assessment on your platform where the systems are, and obviously provide security policies and measures right across the board. So these includes things like access controls and encryption and data masking, audit trail. There's lots of topics under security, and as part of the cyber and sort of data security requirements is one around data classification, data archival, data sensitivity, right? Sort of labeling information and sort of sorting out what's relatively benign versus what's more sensitive as part of that. So data collection should really be as judicious as possible. The less you collect, I think the easier it is. And I'll come back to a handful of approaches, kind of how to tackle this, but that would be, I would say, low-hanging fruit to understand where the data is being collected and whether it's needed or it's not needed, and then either don't collect it or remove it or put on a potential schedule, which is also another concept that is being introduced by this California regulation this year. And I think I mentioned the data breach notification. I think those are the big, the big top 7 obligations. There's a few nuances to here, but I think those are the ones that, from a technology perspective, it's mostly germane to sort of start thinking about from an obligation perspective. As I mentioned, a lot of the privacy regulation and work was done in legal teams. There's a lot of opportunity for technologists and technology team to be more involved, and actually to come in with sort of a customer data sort of first approach to look at where data is, how can be protected, how can be handled, and sort of build out this function either within IT or as a collaboration with different groups. There's another question here for privacy regulation result in increasing cost for customers. Yes, they are. That's another great question. They are. I would say there are some costs that have to be borne of these regulations. I mentioned the cost to handle these consumer requests, right? That's not easy, and it's not mature, right? That the industry have to sort of put things in place to lower the cost and scalability of those requests. I'm assuming some of these could be passed to the customers. I would say, from what I've seen, the costs have risen to a level where it warrants sort of being passed that cost to others. In fact, I would say there is an ROI to privacy investment. And again, I think it all goes around the consumer data. If we can get a better grasp and a deeper understanding of that data, how is it handled, what type of data is it, even rationalization, right? If we have multiple channels, in our case, in our environment, we have a tremendous amount of brands and channels. It's very rare to find retailers now that are just one channel alone, right? It's in store, it's online. It's a number of different product lines or affiliate marketing. There's lots of flavors, and it's difficult. It's difficult to even unpack on a consumer data, which is the right customer, right? Is it one Ray? Is it Raymond? Is it one credit card, 2 credit cards? Understanding that 360-degree right view of your customers and that profile, that kind of master golden record of where the source is coming, I think that has a tremendous value for marketing teams, for data analytics teams, and also for business teams, right? To understand, okay, where where do we have the where do we have the most where do we have the most profitable customers? What kind of customers can find more like them? Where do we spend our money, our ROI for marketing, how to reach, etc. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I think there's a lot of investment that can be done with relatively high ROI from a cost perspective. Putting this a few ideas here for the team to really look at where privacy privacy applications are impacting retail operations. So obviously in stores, we have traffic counters. The old school traffic counters have really evolved to, sort of thermal imaging and, tracking devices. I would say that is something that would definitely trigger privacy laws as well as customer expectations. Remember, there was a Nordstrom incident a few years ago where they put a notice that basically they sort of track you around the store, and obviously there was a PR disaster. Buying online, pick up in store. Again, if you're scanning licenses or if you're scanning IDs, that is definitely would trigger it. Marketing initiatives, right? People calling the old sort of black books, right? Where your sales folks can call customers. That's obviously that's directly privacy impacting. And on the e-commerce side, the big thing that I would say is not obvious beyond the marketing technology and the whole tracking tracking tools and platforms out there would be like virtual try-ons, or I guess the smart mirrors in the store version, right? Where people can try something virtually. There's a camera being recorded. That also is, very much smacking into the biometrics and privacy regulations. Now, what's the opportunity, right? Going back to the question around the costs. So the opportunity for retailers to invest and to get ahead of the privacy curve here is really around customer experience and customer trust, right? There's I'll give you a few examples that we've I've had the privilege to work on. The first one on the experience component is a customer preference center, basically as one source to provide your customers a way to interact with your company, right? Some people want hear more, or more frequently less, right? Less marketing communications. This is where they can have a view into, I want to, don't text me, but email me, or email me once a week, or I want to hear about these topics, not others, right? Providing a sort of a full, it's not personalization per se, but it's a lot more tailored, a tailored view and communication to those customers is not only beneficial. It's obviously, respecting privacy choices, but also, again, right, it sort of provides a a very granular control to customers for them to interact with your brand. So that is, I've seen these projects drive a lot of value, primarily, actually, most of them are driven by marketing teams, not even technology or privacy teams, but they're right at hand with marketing and outreach efforts. As far as transparency, I mentioned earlier, there's, and I have some data here that I guess sort of this, I can describe a little more detail, but there's a lot of focus also on customers shopping anonymously, right? Majority of online transactions are anonymously, whereas people don't log in, or they shop out with a checkout as a guest. And part of that reason is because of they're not comfortable to provide all the information, right? There's some fields, there's some studies on this. Some people are more comfortable than others, right? Providing like email addresses or gender, right? Those are easy. more difficult to provide, birth dates, or there are a little more concerns around family information or like anniversary dates, et cetera. There's a spectrum of data being collected and some hesitancy to provide that information. So I would say that is that was a surprising, for me coming in from privacy, to see how many people have been hesitant to provide all that data. But like I said, it's very, very useful for marketing teams, which is why it's being collected. But it's not, it's not, like I said, it's not the cause of, it's not the primary driver of people, not logging in or creating customer profiles, but it's definitely a big variable in it. And this is where, if we're going to take an opportunity to make a business case for investing in privacy, or again to start to cultivate sort of a customer data sort of focused a function, this would be where I would focus on in terms of understanding the consumer expectations for how data is being used, how it's being collected. And the easiest way to do that is to partner with marketing teams, or your CMO, right, for for driving the branding message in a consistent way. That's the easiest, and I would say the fastest path to either ROI and to get some some traction for the program. I mentioned these are I mentioned the need for transparency and to basically don't collect information that are not necessary or poorly used. I would say this is another. These are also relatively easy things to implement, and will go far a long way. The question around recommending to protect data and protect privacy, there's a number of ones, and there's a number of it's a great question. A few simple things, and I have it here under the sort of the quick win or sort of low hanging fruit initiative pile, which is easy things to do, is to provide some transparency up front, like your notices, contact information, implement some tools, and these are relatively easy and they're really inexpensive to govern how people can opt out. If you're in California, that is the law. That's not even an optional step, but there is a way for people to easily reach out to say, I don't want to be tracked, or I want you to unsubscribe me. That we can implement relatively easily. The other piece that is also easy is to go and do an assessment, right? An assessment of what you have, what's being collected, understand why it's being collected. And if it's useful, then it's, that's a business decision. But there's a lot of times where the data is being collected just because somebody asked for a long time ago. And I find that also easy, another easy way to reduce the scope, complexity, and reduce exposure, right? The more data you have, the more data you have to collect and protect and manage. And the last piece from a recommendation perspective is to reach out to your cross sort of your stakeholders. I mentioned marketing is one, legal is another one, sourcing is not an obvious one, but those are important stakeholders for vendors that process personal data, sourcing, functional procurement, and obviously business leads, right? There's lots of those, and there's lots of people worrying about how do you increase sales and how do you market to customers. And I think those are great stakeholders for this conversation, because again, you're bringing something to them, right? You're basically bringing a way to interact with customers in a better approach, where people are less frustrated, and we're also mitigating risk. All right, I think we're at time, so appreciate everybody's time, And my information is there on the page. You're welcome to follow up with me. I can provide some context or sort of point you to additional data. Anything on these slides, there's plenty of data and details to go through. Thanks again. And Nick, back to you.
Thanks again, Ray. That was great. That was an incredible keynote. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. This officially concludes the Argyle CIO for Retail Leadership Forum. Thank you again for joining us today and engaging in our content, and have a great rest of the day.